I hadn't started anything yet. So now I have, though.
And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go.
Hello again, and welcome to American Top 40. I'm Casey Kasem, and I want to thank Dave. Debuting this week at number 36.
Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another fantastic installment from very high above. All the puerile and bombastic twits in the Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics.
I always wonder why you choose when you choose the bombastic twits line, but I just noticed the last 3 times it's right after you look at me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just take whatever you want to take from it, Agent 29. But welcome to the program, my friends. From the base of the Bighorns, I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics. Firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone. Welcome to the program, my friends. Happy Tuesday, and happy return to the 2-hour format of Cowboy State Politics. I know. You're thinking, how could it possibly ever be done? Well, I mean, there's enough stuff going on in the Cowboy State. If you look at the stack of stuff, I mean, it's grown exponentially. But anyway, welcome to the program, and we're happy to bring you the first 2-hour episode of Cowboy State Politics Live, actually in the new studio, in the new format. You know, when I first started Cowboy State Politics Live, one of the very first episodes, I decided I was going to do 2 hours. And then I realized how difficult doing 2 hours of radio, online or otherwise, actually is. But you got to progress. You got to go forward. You've got to improve your craft, hone your skills, as it were. So that's what we're doing.
You got to pawn off part of the work on somebody else.
Well, I mean, yeah, I it's true. I do have to pawn off some of the work. Did you notice Ken's microphone? Ken, show him your toy over there.
No, I was saving. I was saving that, but that's fine.
Yeah, well, that's what I do. I steal people's thunder.
Well, I do that to you all the time.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Turnabout is fair play.
Well, tell us about the microphone.
Anybody who is a fan of bluegrass would probably recognize one of these. It's made by a company called Ear Trumpet Labs. And not only do they look cool, but they work really well.
Well, it's got the springs on it, and I mean, it's very reminiscent of older microphones. Yeah. You look in like old
they're not
old video.
They're not that old.
Well, I mean, okay, so I forget who my producer is, and that you probably have to cart around your birth certificate using a 2-wheel dolly. I get it. I mean, I understand your pain, Ken. I really do. But, I mean, it's not all of us were born in the Stone Age, so get over it. Stop whining, as it were. Well, we begin this program with, and every day, maybe not every day, every week that the Trump administration is in office, there's something new that they find that was, all of us know, is completely and absolutely wrong, that they're trying to fix. And the media, try as they might, they're unable to cope with really anything that the Trump administration is doing. And it's because the media knows that they have been carrying the water for liberal administrations for a really long time. And basically what they were doing is padding their own pockets, because a lot of these entities, NPR, were benefiting off of tax dollars. And the more Democrats were in power, the media knew that more of your money was going to be delivered to them in various ways, shapes, or forms. And there's a lot of corporations that are extraordinarily liberal that pay into them. So, I mean, it's one big beast that kind of feeds itself. But every week that the Trump administration is in office, we find something new. And here's another piece. A civil rights watchdog threatens to sue USDA for continuing to discriminate against white farmers. Now, this is a story that happened, oh man, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago, where the USDA was giving loans to farmers. But in order to get one of the loans, you had to be some other color other than white. I mean, absolutely, completely racist. But I mean, that pretty much characterizes a lot of what the Biden administration did. Let's see here from justthenews.com, and I quote, a civil rights watchdog has threatened to sue the United States Department of Agriculture for continuing to discriminate against white farmers, despite the new secretary rescinding some of the agency's diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. The Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, WILL is their acronym, said it might take legal action against the USDA Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, over the matter as the new whistleblower allegations came to light. According to the Washington Examiner, whistleblowers have accused the agency of providing loan relief under former President Joe Biden based on race. We appreciate the Trump administration's strong stance against DEI, but Secretary Rollins must take the discrimination at USDA much more seriously. Will's managing vice president and deputy counsel, Dan Lennington, said in a statement, if she doesn't, we will hold her accountable very soon in federal court. She has received fair warning from Will and Congress. Here's why I bring this story up, that Marxism permeates every aspect of a society. And make no mistake, the Democrats are a Marxist party. A lot of what they do, is very much, it could be page, paragraph, and sentence out of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. And here's the reason why it has to permeate every sector of the society. Because if you have one piece that's not following along with the agenda, it breeds dissent. And that's the one thing that any Marxist regime can't have. Think about Germany, but before the Berlin Wall fell. One side of Berlin, absolutely free, everything is great. The other side, absolutely repressed. No automobiles that were made after a certain date. It was very hard to get food. There weren't any jobs. And the only jobs that you had basically paid just as much as the next guy. So, it was absolute repression and control of the entire economy, of the entire society, really. And when you boil Marxism down, it really is a diminutive and deconstructionist attitude. But by that, I mean that everything is reduced to its lowest possible terms. And if you don't understand what I mean, think fractions in mathematics. When you're adding fractions together, you reduce them all the way down to the lowest term. So, for example, 12/16. Well, that fraction can be reduced to 3/4. Well, in Marxism, when you reduce things to its lowest terms, it always ends up being race. Think Germany before World War II. When Hitler came to power, everything began to be there was a massive effort to reduce everything on the basis of race. You had to be, white and blue-eyed and blonde-haired. You couldn't be a Jew. You couldn't be Russian. And interestingly enough, when we talk about Hitler, we don't really know that, most people don't know that his first campaign was against Russia, was against the Slavic people. It wasn't the Jews. And it was just later on that the Jewish people were added. Now, it's true, when he wrote Mein Kampf, there was a lot of anti-Semitic stuff in that book. But my point is that it didn't matter what the race was. All of the problems, according to Adolf Hitler in Germany, were reduced to race. And if you move that to other countries that have tried Marxism, think about communist Cuba. Same aspects there: complete repression, complete control over the entire society, and really everything functions on race. Well, that's really it's not that much different than what the Marxists and the Democrat Party are trying to do in America. Not anymore, because Trump is in office. Well, I guess I shouldn't say that. They are still trying to do that, but they're not having as much success simply because Trump is in office. Everything gets reduced to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I mean, that's just code language for racism, is all that is. So, just another example of how the Trump administration is fighting the racism that exists in the Democrat Party, in all ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, pretty much all of the news has been encompassed by the big, beautiful bill lately. And I mean, why shouldn't it be? It's a gigantic omnibus monstrosity. Oh, and by the way, I should probably give you, and I know I'm getting a little off topic here, but provide you kind of a roadmap of what's going to happen this week on the program. On tomorrow's episode of the show, I've got an interesting interview with President of the Conservative Caucus, Jim Paff. Now he's been in and around Washington for his entire career, and he's the head of an organization that calls itself the Conservative Caucus. And I think what you're going to find is that this guy's been in Washington D.C. way too long. But I did spend the better part of a half hour talking with him. And so we're going to play that interview for you tomorrow during the second hour of the broadcast. So that's coming. And the reason why I bring this up is that really what you're seeing is a battle between new conservatives and people that have been in Washington for a really long time. In Washington, if you cut anything, you can proclaim is look at how conservative we are. Now, in the big, beautiful bill, it is true that there is a $1.4 trillion cut. And I mean, that sounds good. It sounds great for headlines. I mean, it looks like it's fantastic. But really, that cut is over, and cut probably needs to be in the quotation marks because I don't know that anybody has really done the math on the big, beautiful bill yet. But it's stretched over 10 years. So really, it's not a $1.4 trillion cut. Like when you and I think about cutting our budget, it's immediate, right? We cancel the things that we don't need. Maybe we don't need the subscription to HBO. I canceled mine a really long time ago. Maybe you don't need cable at all, and you just completely get rid of that. But when you and I cut, it happens immediately. I'll give you a great example. The lovely Christine and I were on a trip. I think we were on our honeymoon. And it came over the radio that the CEO of Netflix had donated like $7 million to the Democrat Party and to the Kamala Harris campaign effort. Well, immediately, the lovely Christine got on her phone and canceled our Netflix subscription. It happened immediately, right as you push the button. That's not how government works. Government tends to stretch so-called cuts over a long period of time, and they do that to minimize the damage to their political allies. Now, what Elon Musk and Doge were trying to do is identify cuts that were absolutely outrageous and make them happen all of a sudden. Now, some of those can be done with executive power. The office of the president has pretty much, and I wouldn't say carte blanche, but it really looks like that in some cases, over the entire executive department. He is the top guy at that. He's the boss. So if it falls in the executive department, theoretically, the president has control over it. But there are some of those things that have been ratified through Congress that are trying to be addressed or should be addressed in the big, beautiful bill. Problem being, the folks in the Senate and the House, they're not all that interested in really cutting the budget. From the Daily Wire, and I quote, President Donald Trump's chief budget officer delivered on Sunday a counter-argument to Elon Musk's warning that the House passed a version of the One Big Beautiful Bill would further expand the federal deficit. Now, again, this is one of those things that until the math comes out, until we actually put pen to paper, it's very difficult to figure out if we're actually cutting anything or if we're just spending more money. On CNN's State of the Union, anchor Dana Bash showed Russ Vaught, the director of Office Management and Budget, a soundbite of Musk telling CBS Sunday Morning in a recent interview of his concern that the legislation will inflate the federal deficit that has already blown past $1 trillion in recent years. Musk also referred to the Department of Government Efficiency initiative that he oversaw for the past few months. And here's what Musk said, quote, "I was disappointed to see the massive spending bill, frankly, which increases the budget deficit, not just decrease it. And it undermines the work that the Doge team is doing." Now, Vaught, again, he's been in Washington for a really long time, and generally speaking, I think that he's pretty much on our side. But you have to question the guy who is defending, a dramatic reduction in the amount of budgetary cuts that Doge identified. Really, there are not the $174 billion worth of cuts that are in there. I think when they did the math, it was like $9 billion, something like that.
I also want to know how they define a cut, because traditionally in D.C., they have escalators on everything. It's going to cost more next year than it does this year. And so let's just say, for round numbers, things going up 10% each year. So now next year it's only going to go up 8%. That's a cut.
You're exactly right.
Yeah,
Baseline budgeting.
I just want to know if that is in effect in this.
Well, and there's a Wyoming example of this too. And, Agent 29, maybe you can weigh in on this, but education, every single budget, the education funding goes up $200 million without these guys over here doing anything. They don't have to vote on anything. They don't have to bring it up. It doesn't have to be in a bill. Automatically, the spending goes up $200 million every budgetary cycle. So $100 million every year. And so what Ken is saying is that with baseline budgeting, it's a reduction in the increase. It's not actually a cut. We're just going to spend less more money. I don't even know how to put it. But we're not going to spend as much money over and above what we did last year as we were projecting. And somehow that's a cut.
Well, not to sidetrack us and go down there, but there is a Doge effort being made here in Wyoming.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm working on is apparently there was $197,000 spent to study where we could put a high-speed railroad between Cheyenne and Denver.
Oh, yeah.
And this isn't even to do anything toward a system that would serve nobody. This is just to study it. So
$200 million to study.
197,000.
Okay, so 200,000. Okay,
Yeah.
but still,
yeah, basically blown into the wind. It was not instigated by the legislature. I'll put it that way.
Well, then how did it show up?
The executive has a slush fund. We're trying to take that away, and we're told we're going to wreck the entire budget if we do that. Anyway,
yeah. So if the governor doesn't have a big giant pile of cash to spend on his every whim, then that's going to wreck the budget. Absolutely ridiculous. But it's the same sort of thinking that happens in Washington, D.C. All right. So back on the big beautiful bill. So Vaught works for President Trump. He's been in Washington for a very long time, and truth be told, I like him. I think that generally speaking, he's a good guy, and I think that he does a fairly good job. So let's see here. Here's what he said. Play cut number 5.
I want to talk about what's going to happen in the Senate this week, which is the president's spending and tax cut bill. Multiple Republican senators say that they can't support the bill as written for lots of reasons. One of the reasons is because they think it really adds to the deficit. Another person who said that was Elon Musk. Listen to what he said.
I was disappointed to see the massive
this is a soundbite I read
spending bill, frankly, which increases the budget deficit, not just decrease it, and undermines the work that the Doge team is doing.
I love Elon. This bill doesn't increase the deficit or hurt the debt. In fact, it lowers it by $1.4 trillion. What some of the watchdogs have done is they have used CBO's artificial baseline, which doesn't allow and assume that current tax law will be extended because of sunsets that are in the law. They don't do that with suspending. It is totally something that would be foreign to any common sense person who comes and looks at how we budget.
Hold on. So basically what he's saying is there's a whole bunch of budgetary tricks that we're not telling you about. And so when you take into account all of the fuzzy math, then our cuts work. Instead of just saying, we're cutting this program, we're cutting this program, we're cutting this program, and it adds up to $1.4 trillion. What he's saying is when the tax cuts come into effect, when all this legislation is passed, that over 10 years, we'll cut $1.4 trillion worth of spending. Go ahead and finish up the soundbite. Maybe.
I want to talk about what's going to happen in the Senate this week,
replay.
which is the president's spending.
It's all right. Just replay the whole thing.
I want to talk about what's going to happen in the Senate this week, which is the president's spending and tax cut bill.
Or maybe not.
A common sense person who comes and looks at how we budget in this country. And so when you assume the extension of the president's tax relief from 2017, this budget or this bill, and it's really a reconciliation bill. It's not really a budget bill. It is using a budget process. This is a $1.4 trillion over 10 years deficit reduction. It's $1.6 trillion in mandatory savings. Obviously, we have a little bit of spending in there as well for border and defense. But that is the biggest mandatory savings package that we have seen since the 1970s, 1997. It's very historic.
So you have your work cut out for you to explain that.
So it's very, very historic. It's very, very big, very, very beautiful. Everybody says so. It's magnificent. It's fantastic. Everybody thinks so. Well, not really. But if you noticed all of the, I mean, he kept saying our budgetary process, the baseline, and again, please just say, I'm going to get rid of this program, this program, this program, and it's going to add up to this amount. Folks in Washington continue to use these budgetary tricks that, I mean, honestly, it's a way that they can continue spending money without you knowing about it.
Don't you understand, David? This is way more complex than that.
Yes, it is.
You can't, you're basically just a redneck. You're not going to understand.
I am. I should find the Boomer Rube soundbite. Maybe we'll do that over the break.
We get the same thing right here in Sheridan County. One of our county commissioners was trying to get to the bottom of some issues, and it's very complicated, my dear. You're just not going to be able to understand.
Yeah,
how it works.
it's just you're too dumb to possibly understand what we're doing here. Absolutely outrageous, and just another example of bad government. Well, let's go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we're going to go to an update on the Anthony Bernal situation. Yeah, it's a guy that we're pretty sure was really in charge of the auto pen. Yeah, he was apparently some sort of Wizard of Oz type character, but we'll talk about that after the break.
U.S. Coin Capital, we hear from Americans across the United States who have a growing concern about the purchasing power of U.S. money. Many Americans are looking for an alternative for long-term capital. For more than 35 years, the people at U.S. Coin Capital have educated American investors on how to properly accumulate United States gold and silver coins. Call us at 1-800-878-2646 or visit us on the web, uscoincapital.com.
Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics.
Some say standing up for what you believe in is being extreme. Ask any woman in Wyoming. They'll tell you this is called courage. The mainstream media claims that holding the line on important issues is being unreasonable. My mom taught me this is called staying true to our principles. In other places, people argue you always have to compromise to get something done. Here in Wyoming, we know that some things are worth protecting at all costs. Some say it's time we give up on the values that made our state great to accommodate toxic culture. I say it's time to stand tall and protect the values that have served Wyoming well for over 134 years. Join Honor Wyoming as we defend and preserve the Wyoming way of life. Find out how you can make a difference today.
Visit honorwyoming.org. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics Live. I'm your host, David Iverson, documented to be almost always right 99% of the time, and now occupying spot number 35 on the list of the 100 podcasts you need to listen to in 2025. That's true. I went up one space and I didn't even have to really do anything. It just shows you the power and the excellence of Cowboy State Politics.
Does that mean that I have to do another seance with Casey Kasem and get him to go number 35?
No, I think we're all right. Okay. You know, I'm not exactly sure why, you know, I mean, and their ratings. So, and I guess they change all the time. So anyway, number 35 on the list of the 100 podcasts you need to listen to in 2025. Now, last week, I told you about a terrifying story, and actually, I think we've all pretty much known this, that it was not Joe Biden who was in charge of anything in the White House, and definitely not in charge of his own faculties. It had to be somebody else behind the scenes, and most political insiders are thinking that person was Anthony Bernal, who was essentially Jill Biden's chief of staff. So Miranda Devine's got a great new piece out where she kind of goes through this whole thing. And I want to take this sort of slow because there's a lot of different pieces in this that kind of point to the influence that Anthony Bernal had in the administration. Now, keep in mind, the Jill Biden's chief of staff really doesn't have any power at all. It's not like the chief of staff to the president, who pretty much runs everything. Like, you know, if you're in Congress and you need to get a hold of the president, you don't really call the president. You try to call the chief of staff. And if you can't get the chief of staff, then you call some other staffer down the line. But to put it in simple terms, okay, in Wyoming, our legislators do not have staff. They have the Legislative Service Office, but they don't really have a staff of gophers. They do all of their own gophering. So for one legislator to say that they have a chief of staff, well, in Wyoming, that's not a thing. It's now maybe they pay for somebody out of their own pocket to be their gopher, to run all their errands and to help them, but that's not an official thing. It's not an office. It's not a job. It's nothing. It's completely made up. And so is the chief of staff to the first lady. Now, I'm sure the first lady has a whole bunch of people working for her, and maybe you need a supervisor on all of that. If it were me, I'd probably personally be the supervisor. But anyway, the chief of staff to the first lady, not a thing. From Miranda Devine's piece, quote, "There are few doubts in the White House about Jill Lady Macbeth Biden's role in covering up her husband's cognitive deficits, as she urged him to run for re-election. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt made that point crystal clear from the press room podium on Thursday, saying that the former First Lady, quote, needs to answer for lying to the American people and shielding her husband away from the cameras. Now, there's a lot of video of Jill Biden kind of ushering the president around to different places, grabbing him by the hand. And you can just imagine the conversation. No, honey, you have to go over here. No, the podium's right here. There's nobody standing behind you. I know you're hearing voices, but it is not the ghost of, I don't know, anybody that's already been dead for 20 years. Yeah, the ghost of Casey Kasem. But, it was very clear from the video that Jill Biden was doing a lot of that. Now, from Caroline Levitt, she says, quote, I think, frankly, the former First Lady should certainly speak up about what she saw in regards to her husband and when she saw and what she knew, she told reporters at a White House press briefing. Anybody looking again at the videos and the photo evidence of Joe Biden with your own eyes and a little bit of common sense can see this was a clear cover-up. And Jill Biden was certainly complicit in the whole thing. Now, some commentators like Leo Terrell is often on Sean Hannity's program, and he's now a senior counselor to the DOJ's Civil Rights Office, went so far as to say that Jill was guilty of elder abuse. Now, it's absolutely not a question that Jill Biden is the winner of the Worst Wife in the World award. Absolutely has to be. I mean, to exploit, and this is just my opinion, but just watching Joe Biden, he was absolutely exploited. Sometimes the guy didn't even know on what planet he was walking, and yet they forced him to be the president of the United States. If it were anybody else, if it were my family, my dad, one of my relatives, I'd say, it's probably time to hang it up. It's a lot like driving. I'm not quite there with my parents yet, but I know a lot of people have had to have the conversation with their parents. Hey, man, it's probably not a good idea for you to drive anymore. Well, that's very similar to what had to have been going on, what should have been going on in the White House, but wasn't. I mean, Joe Biden was not qualified, nor was he capable of being the guy in charge of the nuclear codes. I mean, that's just the plain and simple truth of it. Now, what is becoming clear is that the social climbing former First Lady and the aide that she calls her, quote, work husband, Arizona-born former child actor Anthony Bernal, played a bigger role in the con job than previously anybody had ever acknowledged. Now, David Hogg, recently ousted as vice chair of the Democrat National Committee, and Detarian Jones, a former Biden White House staffer, point the finger at Anthony Bernal as the chief puppeteer in the new undercover video that was released from Project Veritas last week. And that was the soundbite that we played for you from David Hogg sometime last week during the program. I don't know, Agent 29, do we still have that one? Somewhere. We'll look for it, and if we've got it, we'll play it again. But according to David Hogg, Anthony Bernal had an extraordinary amount of power. Jones described Jill's diminutive gay factorum as scary. Yeah, Anthony Bernal's gay, by the way. That's what Miranda Devine is referring to. Scary, like a Wizard of Oz type figure. The general public wouldn't know what he looked like, but he wielded enormous power. Now, according to Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson's new book, Original Sin, which, by the way, is nothing more than a reiteration of everything conservatives have been saying for a really long time. That he, Anthony Bernal, made the First Lady the most powerful one in history. And that gave her, and this is Miranda Devine's explanation of it, a Rasputin-like senior advisor outsized influence among the Politburo that controlled her husband. When Biden was hidden away during the 2020 campaign in his Delaware basement, using the COVID pandemic as an excuse, Bernal was only one of two staffers allowed to move to Wilmington, Delaware, to tend to their daily needs. Now, think about that. You're running for president. And, well, if you're running for any political office, it doesn't matter if it's mayor or if it's a state representative or if it's governor. You have to have a staff. Now, of course, the office that you're running for kind of dictates how big your staff is, but you've got to have somebody managing things. I've only run for city council, and I can tell you that if you're running for a political office, your phone rings almost constantly. And so, I mean, you can either be the one answering the phone all the time, or you can be out talking to voters. And so if you're running for president, you have to think that the staff required to run that operation would be gigantic. So Biden is holed away in his basement, and Anthony Bernal is only one of two staffers that are allowed in there to talk to President Biden, or then candidate Biden. All right, we've got the soundbite from David Hogg. Let's go ahead and play it one more time.
Yes, nice to meet you. Yeah.
Off the record, of course.
foundational question for me is like, how corrupt is the DNC if so many people knew, or few people knew about Biden, well, the president of the United States?
I mean, I think the fact of the matter is the DNC is always going to be like a campaign arm of the president, ultimately. The bigger issue is like the inner circle that was around Biden. That's it.
And I can't stress to you enough.
Like Joe Biden's chief of staff, like had an enormous amount of power.
Joe Biden?
Joe Biden's chief of staff.
That was like an open secret at the level. Like, I would avoid him. Like, he was scary.
What was his name?
Anthony Bernal.
There you go.
I've never seen him.
Exactly.
What do you mean?
He's like a shadowy, like, Wizard of Oz type figure. That's what made him so, like, I knew how he looked, but I'm like, the general public wouldn't know how this man looked. But he wielded an enormous amount of power, and I can't stress how much power he had at the White House.
So anyway, that's a David Hogg, the one pretty high up in the DNC. It was recently ousted, but that doesn't mean that he's entirely out. And he's describing the amount of power that Anthony Bernal had in the Biden White House. And just think about that, right? He's not even an official in any official capacity. He's just the aide to the First Lady, Jill Biden. And, you know, what it's beginning to look like, he's the guy that was making decisions inside the White House. Now, I was listening to a radio program over the weekend while I was doing a little bit of yard work. That's what I do. You know, I get my honeydew list done, and I've usually got my earbuds in listening to, you know, some other podcast, not Amy Edmonds' podcast, but somebody who actually has something important to say. And one example was used that in the final day of the Biden presidency, 2,400 people were pardoned. 2,400. Now, do you really think that it was Joe Biden that was making those decisions? Do you really think that he was capable of sitting down and making the decision whether or not to pardon those 2,400 people? Now, it's not just the actual crimes they were committed of, it's the breadth of them. I mean, that's a ton of files to go through. So I think that it's a fair estimation that Joe Biden was not the one in control. So the question is, who was in control? And this Anthony Bernal character seems to be one of them. Miranda Devine continues. As Joe faded and disappeared from view toward the end of his presidency, Jill's rival court took charge as she commandeered Air Force, and listen to this, she commandeered Air Force One and a big Secret Service contingent for her frenetic round of solo campaigning. And if you remember, in the final days of the presidency, Jill Biden was everywhere. How did she do that? On Air Force One. She was always accompanied with the indispensable Anthony Bernal. Her priority over then-candidate Donald Trump for Secret Service resources at a dinner she attended in Pittsburgh on the day of the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. She blamed, in part, for Trump being inadequately protected when he was shot during an attempted assassination. Bernal was by Jill's side when she swanned into Hunter's gun trial in Wilmington, Delaware, to project presidential power to the jury, who rightfully convicted Hunter Biden anyway. He joined Jill, Anthony Bernal, on Air Force One as she jetted back to France for 24 hours at taxpayer expense. So let me just clarify this for you. Biden and Jill Biden and Anthony Bernal and Air Force One were over in France during Hunter's trial. So Jill Biden hops on Air Force One, flies all the way back to Delaware for the trial, and then the very next day hops back on Air Force One and flies all the way back to France. Now, the First Lady does not have the ability to, hop on a plane and travel anywhere they want. She's not an official. She's not an official U.S. official, but she's not really a U.S. official. So she doesn't get all the perks that the president does. Let's see here. Now, we may learn more about Anthony Bernal's role in the coming weeks as the House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer probes the cover-up of Joe's cognitive decline and whether the president was fit to authorize the use of an auto pen for his signature on executive actions. Now, I've told you before that I think that this scandal, that is Joe Biden being incapacitated, and that it was Jill Biden or Anthony Bernal or somebody else in the White House controlling things, is a scandal that rivals even Woodrow Wilson. let me just put this into context for you. Woodrow Wilson had a stroke shortly thereafter, he was trying to get Congress to approve the League of Nations. There's a lot of different things going on, the peace treaty of World War I, the League of Nations, and finally, he just stroked out. For the next 2 years, he was laying in a bed and not really doing anything. It was Edith Wilson that was pretty much controlling everything. There's lots of stories if you read her biography and other folks who've written about that time in the presidency, that she literally would put the pen in Woodrow Wilson's hand and sign documents. Okay, so this scandal with Joe Biden, that is, he was incapacitated from, in my opinion, from the very first moment that he stepped into the Oval Office for 4 years, that they would call a lid at 11 o'clock in the morning. Now, none of us have been president, but I can imagine that there's still stuff going on after 11 a.m. I mean, it's not like you can call an end to the day and you're done. Most normal people have way too much stuff to just say, we're done at 11 and we're not doing any more work. Can you imagine what it's like in the Oval Office? I mean, there's no way that Joe Biden was able to accomplish all of that. So somebody else had to. And there were a lot of questionable decisions. Last week, I read you a list of some of the executive orders that were probably way too technical for Joe Biden to even understand. And yet, his signature via the auto pen showed up on them. So then the question is, who was the one managing the auto pen? Now, the American people deserve to know, and this is how Miranda Devine ends the piece, who was running the White House the last 4 years. But it may not be so easy to prove that Joe was out of it. The former president showed that he still has fight in him last week when he showed up at a Veterans Memorial event in Delaware and snarked at questions from reporters about his cognitive and physical health. And I've got that soundbite. Let's see here. I was going to use this later, but it's cut number 1. Go ahead and play this.
And there's also been a lot of discussion recently about your mental and physical capabilities while you were in office.
You can see that. I'm mentally incompetent, and I can't walk, and I could beat the hell out of both of them.
Well, do you want to reply to any of those reports, and also to the fact that there are some Democrats who are now questioning whether you should have run for re-election in the first place?
Why didn't they run against me then? I got beaten.
Do you have any regrets?
No, I don't. Look, we have a lot going on.
Okay, that's pretty much the end of it. So Biden still has some fight in him. But if you've ever, I mean, many of us have had relatives that were suffering from dementia. And the truth is, you have good days and bad days. My grandpa Dave, sometimes, I mean, he was sharp as a tack. And then you'd go in another day, and he wouldn't know that he was on planet Earth.
Actually, having a little fight in you is not a good thing.
Mm-mm.
Most of us have a way of censoring ourselves.
Yep.
A particular way of knowing that this is something I should say, this is something I should not. And a lot of times when people are suffering from these diseases as they get older, incapacitated mentally, they lose that self-awareness. And I've seen little old ladies who were preachers' wives who would swear like a drunken sailor. And that's all because of their issues.
Oh, yeah. Like Grandpa Dave. I mean, he would be, when he was lucid, which wasn't very often towards the end, but when he was lucid, he was fine. And he vacillated between being, plain old Grandpa Dave to being angry all the time. I mean, it's just two base emotions, and that's pretty much all he was capable of. And I think if you pay attention to Joe Biden, there were times where he was just downright nasty. And then he was times where he was like the normal Joe, nice grandfatherly like figure that didn't recognize one of his grandchildren. But I mean, so it's not a good thing. And I think there was a lot of evidence to say that Joe Biden definitely not in control of his faculties. Now, in that soundbite, and actually I was going to use it in the next story, but we'll talk about it anyway. So he was at an event for his son, Beau Biden. And I mean, actually, it was a larger veterans event, but I mean, part of it was to honor Beau Biden. Let's hear from the Daily Wire. Former President Joe Biden told reporters on Friday that he could, quote, beat the hell out of both of them. Go ahead and play that soundbite again, Ken.
And there's also been a lot of discussion recently about your mental and physical capabilities while you were in office.
You can see that. I'm mentally incompetent, and I can't walk, and I could beat the hell out of both of them.
Okay, there you go. So he says he could beat the hell out of both of them. And that's kind of been Joe Biden's refrain his entire career. And here's, and I'm no doctor or anything, but just my experience with Grandpa Dave, that his long-term memory actually was pretty good. But it's his short-term memory that he really had a hard time with. Grandpa Dave could talk a lot about, and he hardly ever did, but the older he got and in the later stages of his dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever, he started to talk about experiences during Korea, which, growing up, I never remember him talking about it, but it was extraordinary, the detail that he could add to things. Now, Joe Biden, same thing in his entire career. It's always been, I want to take him behind the school and beat the hell out of him. And I mean, this is just another example of that. So anyway, Joe Biden, absolutely off his rocker. And now, I don't think there's any more that you can say, except that I think it's extraordinarily important that we find out who was responsible for, making decisions in the White House, because it clearly was not him. When we come back from the break, I've got a story that I find extraordinarily disturbing, but it's one that we probably shouldn't be surprised about. It's Egypt has decided that they're going to take over the property of a 1,500-year-old monastery. And we're going to talk about that. It's a pretty long article, but we're going to talk about it when we come back. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live. You can listen to the program on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, on Rumble, pretty much everywhere. It's almost like I'm omnipresent. If you miss an episode of Cowboy State Politics Live, you can always go to the live replay, which is located at the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, under the live replay button. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics Live every Tuesday through Friday at 8 a.m. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program. David Iverson, doing what I was born to do, with talent given to me by God himself. Welcome back to the program, my friends. Cowboy State Politics Live in our new 2-hour format. I always had the feeling, before today, that I really didn't have the time to get into enough depth on, any given article. You only have so much time in an hour, and if you burn through 30 minutes talking about something, well, you're going to miss the story you had lined up a little bit later in the broadcast. So 2 hours, the new format. We're going to continue to do this until, I'm not capable of it. And actually, that's not even true. So on Thursday, we've got to cut the program a little bit short. So Thursday is my dad's birthday. And so we're going to go play golf. I'm not a good golfer. I used to be good in high school. I was pretty close to a scratch golfer at one point, but not anymore. So we're going to go play golf on Thursday.
So the following week, I got to go be a legislator.
Why? What?
I go spend 3 days down in Cheyenne, so I'll be gone.
I'm sorry.
Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Have fun, buddy.
Yeah, well, it'll be fine. I can run this thing for 2 hours. What are you doing down in Cheyenne, aside from just playing the legislator?
Capital finances. We decide how to invest all these bazillions of dollars that we've got. One of my suggestions is going to be just send it back to the people.
I think so. I mean, I know that suggestion sounds a little bit crazy, but in Wyoming, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Agent 29, but we've got what, $7 billion, $10 billion. How much is it do we have in the bank?
That depends on where you draw the line. All told, we've got about 30 billion.
Okay, 30 billion.
Yeah. Now, a lot of that is encumbered with various things. We got to pay retirements and all that, and we're not really allowed to touch it because it's in a trust fund.
Right, the permanent mineral trust fund.
It's in the trust fund. So it's interesting to see how they do what they do with that. And sometime maybe we can get into that and just kind of discuss the philosophy that I have, which is a little different from most people, about the government sitting and hoarding billions of dollars.
Well, maybe we ought to set up a time to get the chairman of appropriations in here. He only lives in Gillette. Maybe we can get him to come over for.
I'm sure we could get him to do that.
Let's work on that, and maybe we'll get him in before you go down to your meeting, and we can have a discussion about how that all works. So let's work on that. So here's a story I found last night, and probably I should explain to you how my show prep works. How it was supposed to work with the 1 hour program, but now it has to with the 2 hour program. But usually, I just sit on the couch with my iPad and just kind of look through the news. And, if I find something interesting, I just send it to the printer. And, in the morning, I grab the whole stack and come down to the studio. But I found this piece, and, it's interesting how history repeats itself. It always does. And, I've always said that the reason we study history is so that we know what not to do in the future. That the mistakes that we've made in the past, we should all be able to learn from. But it's also interesting how the same old grudges and the same old, relationships between people tend to come back. And they come back with a vengeance. And we see it a lot with different attitudes of people. We're dealing with a lot of racism right now. I mean, there's college students who really don't know. I've got a pretty funny soundbite from Bill Maher that we're going to play a little bit later on in the broadcast. But he's talking about how college students really don't have any idea what they're talking about, and they're just running around chanting "Free Palestine," and they don't really realize that Palestine has never been a country before in the history of the world. I know there are maps that say that Palestine is a country, but it really never has been, ever, and since antiquity. So I found this story, and it's entitled, let's see if I can find out where I got it from. May have been Reason Magazine. But anyway, it's entitled, Egypt Accused of Taking Over and Seizing Property from Iconic Orthodox Monastery. Let me just read the first couple paragraphs to you. The head of the Orthodox Church of Greece accused the Egyptian government Thursday of seizing and confiscating property belonging to an ancient Christian religious site in the Sinai Peninsula and threatening the religious freedoms of the monastery's monks. His beatitude, and Irenaeus II, Archbishop of Athens and all Greece, was reacting in his statement to an Egyptian appeals court ruling that the holy monastery of St. Catherine of Mount Sinai and surrounding religious heritage sites were part of, quote, Egypt's public domain, although its monks retained the right to use them. Now, this monastery is over 1,500 years old. Quote, the world's oldest Orthodox Christian monument was entering a great ordeal, which harks back to the other dark times, the Archbishop wrote. The monastery is over 1,500 years old and houses rare Byzantine icons and rare and ancient manuscripts. So 1,500 years. And Ken, you being the learned guy that you are, you can probably tell me if I'm accurate about this, but that almost dates back to when the Gospels were written. Am I right about that?
Not quite.
Pretty close, though, right?
Yeah, you're in the ballpark. If you figure it was 2,100 years or somewhere in there, most of the Gospels were written between 70 and 100.
Okay, so a little bit later.
So.
Maybe, you know what I'm thinking of? Constantine. So
it could be.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, he'll stick in your mind.
Yeah.
You got a picture there?
I do. So this is throw my screen up there. Okay, so this is the monastery that we're talking about here, and it is in Egypt, and it's over 1,500 years old. So think about that just for a second. 1,500 years ago, this monastery was established. Now, since that time, since it was started, how many? I mean, the Crusades were going on. What historians refer to as the Dark Ages, which really weren't all that dark. We could go into that sometime, but.
Joe Biden was born.
Yeah. Yeah, Joe Biden was born. Absolutely ridiculous. So anyway, Egypt has decided to seize that property. And one would never accuse a majority Muslim nation of really caring about any Christian religious sites. But this is a trend we've seen going on in the Middle East for several years. Lots of Christian sites have been killed, and generally speaking, lots of Christians today are being killed. And this is just another example of how Christianity really is under attack under the guise of, well, this is really public property, and everybody really ought to have the ability to go check it out. Do you really think that's what Egypt's up to? They're not exactly the democratic country that some people think they are.
It's not just Egypt, of course.
No.
Believe it or not, it happens in Wyoming. And I don't want to derail the conversation and get very deep into this, but these ESAs are affecting a lot of Christian schools, and we're seeing a lot of pushback from folks about money going to a Christian school.
Yeah, now what you're talking about, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but historically, preschools and a lot of private schools were run by churches. We've got one right here in Sheridan, Holy Name.
Universities all started out as extensions of churches.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The preschool I went to was at the Catholic Church in Buffalo. And so, with this ESA, we're giving money, $7,000 of government money, to homeschool your kids. And we all know...
No.
Excuse me, through vouchers.
No. Homeschoolers don't want the money because they don't want the strings. So most homeschoolers aren't doing that. But there are a lot of people who have their kids in charter schools or in other private institutions, and they're getting a little slice of their tax dollars back to go and support those. So I'm a stickler out of that because of where my wife and I sit in the homeschool business.
Sure.
Yeah, we don't want the money. We don't want the strings. Just leave us alone.
All right, so we're kind of getting off topic, but this is something I've been wanting to...
I didn't want to do that.
It's all right. This is something I've been wanting to talk to you about anyway. But Agent 29 and his wife, Diane, are in the middle of what I consider to be a pretty awesome project. And they are setting up, and it's not really setting up because they already have what they're calling a lending library. But they're working on a big expansion of it. And we're talking about like classical books, right? Right, Ken?
Yeah, it's my wife specializes in classical literature. She teaches from beginning reading all the way up through, but primarily she works with trying to teach teachers or trying to teach parents how to homeschool, how to teach their kids. And of course, invariably that comes up, well, what do I use for material? Well, among other things, Diane has published several years ago it's a unit study on C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, and people use that to teach their kids. But that puts her squarely into the resources business. And so as she begins to mentor these young folks, some of them aren't that young because some of them are actually doing their grandkids.
Right.
So as she begins to mentor them, their questions, where do I get these materials? So it kind of was the natural segment of that. So we've put together a collection ourselves of a couple of thousand books, and we have a tremendous benefactor coming along who's going to give us some more. And these are quality books. These are classics. These are good histories. This is not your romance novels. And I would defy you to go into that library and try to find any of the other books we've been talking about.
Yeah. Well,
Not going to
anyway,
be there.
the reason why I'm so enamored with this project, and at some point we're going to have Diane in to talk about the library. I mean, may as well go to the boss in that whole situation. But we are talking about classic works of literature, classic, really important books that children really should be studying. And I've got a couple of examples back here on the shelf of some volumes that you would find in their library, the Britannica Great Books. But I think it's a tremendous project, and the reason why I say that is the last time I was in, not the library here in Sheridan, but the library in Buffalo, there used to be this gigantic collection of philosophy, the great works, the classic literature, Iliad, the Odyssey, and not just this whole set that you see part of it on my shelf back here. But the last time I went in there, and I was in Buffalo, and I was working there at my parents' house, and I needed a book. And the book was, I didn't want to drive all the way to Sheridan to get a book. So I just went to the library, and all of those books were gone. I mean, not just in another section of the library, but gone.
That's happening everywhere in all these libraries. They're getting rid of all of the classics. They're getting rid of the stuff that built, the kind of thinking that built America is in those books. And if it's a way of separating us. You just mentioned earlier, those that don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And that's essentially what happens is we don't understand why America is the way it is, why our liberties are as important as they are. And it's a way of keeping classical training in mind so that by the time kids get to college, they know how to think, they have some discernment. And we're actually working on expanding this homeschool program, which is a whole other thing we need to get into at the university level.
Okay. So the reason why and actually it ended up fitting in pretty nicely into this, is that monastery, 1,500 years old, imagine what is in there. 1,500 years of history. Think about the manuscripts that are in there that you can't find anywhere else. That original sources that, I mean, you would have to travel to Egypt to read them. But just think about all of the history, all of the knowledge, everything that is in there, not just the religious artifacts, but like I said, the history there that has just been seized by the Egyptian government. Now, of course, the Egyptian government is saying, well, no. See, we're preserving this for the public. We're making sure that everybody has access to it. In fact, the spokesperson for the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that such allegations that they were seizing it are completely unfounded, that's in quotation marks, and could hurt centuries-old close fraternal and historic relations that bind Egypt to the friendly Hellenic Republic. The Hellenic Republic is Greece, by the way, according to a Friday statement published by the Embassy of Egypt in Athens. Quote, this judicial ruling represents the first instance in which the legal status of a monastery has been regulated, with clear affirmation of the preservation of its sacred standing. The ruling also upheld the monastery's right to continue the use of religious and archaeological sites within the area, as well as some of the other sites, quote, for which contracts have been signed with local authorities despite their classification of natural reserve. So what you have here is the government of Egypt saying we're now in control of this religious site. So the question is, why do they want it? It's not for public access. Egypt is not the free republic that we have here. Why do they want it?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't know that I have any insight into that. But I do want to go back to those manuscripts. That's one of those things that I've studied for a long time. I actually have photostatic copies of a lot of these ancient records. There are a lot of them, though, because they've been sitting around for 1,000, 1,500 or more years, are so brittle that you can't touch them, and they're rolled up in a scroll. Some of them have even been charred, and so when you look at them, the material, the papyrus there, has been charred to the point where you can't even tell the difference of where the ink is Well, they've been using AI now
This is
along with
exactly
some
where I was going.
X-rays. Yeah,
Mhm.
they've been using AI along with some X-rays to be able to go through and read and print out these manuscripts without even touching them, and to get in there and find things that previously would have been lost to history. So presumably there's some, knowledge is power. Presumably there's something in there that they either want to repress or that they would like to expose. My guess is Egypt is darkness.
Yeah. Well,
They
think about
probably
it.
want to repress.
This is what I meant by history repeats itself. It was Egypt that the Israelites fled when they were in bondage, and they, you know, left. And it's history always repeats itself, my friends, and there is always going to be an attempt to turn out the lights, to shut out the lights, to make sure that the truth is not available. And there's an agenda behind all of it. And me being me, I see an agenda everywhere I look. It's I'm blessed with one of the gifts. Maybe it's a gift, maybe it's a curse, to be able to recognize when there's an agenda there and when it's just people being honest. And there's absolutely an agenda behind this one. There's a reason why the country of Egypt wants control of that monastery, and it could be as simple as they don't want any opposition to their government's plans. They don't want a whole bunch of Christians in a 1,500-year-old monastery saying, "No, no, this is the truth, right here, right here. This is the truth. What you're saying is bullcrap." And it could be as simple as that. But my guess is there's something far more sinister behind it. And unfortunately, reports like this are pretty hard to come by. And I'm sure this has been going on for a long time, but this is the first piece that I've seen about it. So let's see here. Let me just read the last two paragraphs of it. Quote, "The presidency of the Arab Republic of Egypt reiterates its full commitment to preserving the unique and sacred religious status of St. Catherine's Monastery and preventing its violation." You notice that word Arab Republic? You know what that probably refers to? Muslim Republic. And, those two words are contradictory. When Muslims talk about freedom, it's a very different thing than when you and I do.
I don't know if it's on your list, but we just had an act of terror by an Egyptian national.
Interesting.
Yeah. There is a spiritual battle heating up all over the world.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think you're absolutely correct. In fact, we talked about this in church on Sunday, that, a lot of the things that you're seeing, this guy that firebombed, a bunch of Jewish protesters, truly evil. And another thing that I want everybody to consider when you're watching these news reports, there's video of this guy dancing around, and he's holding two, I'm assuming they're Molotov cocktails. The news called it a makeshift flamethrower, which I suppose that's what a Molotov cocktail is. But he's dancing around, and there's somebody videoing him. Now, let me just ask you a question. If you know that something bad is about to happen, why are you just standing around with your phone videoing it? We see a lot of videos from subways, people getting assaulted in the subway or, out in public, and somebody's standing there taking a video. And just think about the level our society has fallen to, where instead of doing the right thing and defending those people who are ostensibly defenseless, you're sitting around with a camera.
There's also video that I saw of a rather portly gentleman who gets involved in this, and he's siding with the terrorists.
Yeah.
And telling everybody, yelling at them, kind of getting on board with that, and you got to let this guy talk and don't mess with him. So there was a little bit of that. Another thing that was particularly disturbing to me was over on one side is a victim laying there, and there are two or three people attending to the victim, rendering some sort of first aid. You really can't tell because they had it blurred out in the copy that I saw. And adjacent to the body laying there was an American flag.
Yep.
Laying on the ground. Millions of people, not millions, many people.
Whole bunch of people.
Yeah. It felt like millions. Many people milling around, not really doing anything. Nobody attempting to subdue this guy or to stop him. Nobody even would bother walking over there and picking up the colors and getting them out of the floor. In fact, a couple people walked over them as if They were nothing.
Yeah, sad state of affairs that our country is in. One where you'd rather take a video, break some news, than to stop somebody from doing something bad and hurting another person. So the next story is not any happier. But before I get to it, if you want to be part of today's show, the phone number here in the studio is 307-374-8989. We're into our second hour, the first second hour of the program. So if you want to call in and be part of the program, the phone lines are open. Again, that phone number is 307-374-8989. 307-374-8989. It's the number here in the studio. If you got a question on your mind or something you want to talk about, go ahead and give me a call. So this next piece, and if you had any doubt of how evil, and I do mean evil, some of the people in the White House were, this next story should absolutely confirm it for you. From the Federalist. And this one's hard. Okay. So the Biden administration ignored or dismissed more than 7,000 reports of trafficking of migrant kids. Think about that number, 7,000 reports. The Biden administration, quoting now, ignored or dismissed more than 65,000 reports related to migrant children, including more than 7,300 reports of human trafficking, according to details of a Department of Health and Human Services summary released by Senator Chuck Grassley. Of the reports, 56,591 were, quote, notifications of concern. 7,346 were reports of human trafficking, and 1,688 were fraud leads, according to the press release released by Grassley. The Trump administration has since taken the responsibility on, having processed more than 28% of the backlog left by the Biden administration, according to a press release. There have been 7 indictments, 25 arrest warrants, 11 arrests, and 3 convictions so far, according to the press release. Now, when you hear the terms human trafficking, what you should think of is sexual abuse of a minor. Child prostitution, child pornography. Anytime you hear the word child trafficking, that's what's happening. And there were over 7,000 reports of that happening that went to the White House that went ignored. And if you have any question about how deranged and how evil some of those people are, this is the confirmation for it right here. I mean, this is by far one of the most disturbing articles I've read in a long time. But thank God we have somebody like Chuck Grassley who has made it his mission to get to the bottom of it and to start processing these tips, I guess you would say. In a statement, Grassley, who's been spearheading efforts to save migrant children being exploited or abused, alleged the Biden administration placed, quote, unaccompanied migrant children with dangerous sponsors and actively obstructed law enforcement and Congress's efforts to rescue vulnerable kids. Now, think about that. It's not just that they ignored those 7,000 tips of children being abused. They thwarted the efforts of law enforcement to get to the bottom of it. So because their political agenda was more important to them, that is, letting as many people into this country as humanly possible, they allowed 7,000 children to go by the wayside. And I mean, this is not, holy crap. This is the entire population of Buffalo, Wyoming is 4,800 people. That's more children than all of the people that live in that town. The population of Sheridan is around 20,000. So we're talking, a little bit less than a third. I mean, this is a huge amount. And just consider the evil that has to exist when you allow that to happen. Not just, only to one kid is enough. But we're talking about 7,000 children. And why you don't know more about this is an indictment of the media. That it has to be, this has to come from what is pretty much an independent news source. Is outrageous. That this isn't on, the top story on Fox News and CNN and PMSNBC just tells you the depth of the depravity that exists in the Biden administration, I would say in the Democrat Party, and I would also say in the media, that you're not going to take responsibility for protecting these kids. And here's why, because they're migrant children. There's no record of them in the United States. There's no way that you can track them. I mean, we don't have a birth certificate or anything. It's just people they've allowed to come across the border and, allowed whatever somebody wants to do to these poor innocent children to happen. Quote, the Office of Refugee Resettlement is digging through nearly 65,000 reports of concern about unaccompanied alien children, most ignored, many dismissed, each one a missed chance to protect a child, the Department of Health and Human Services said on a post on X. Quote, this isn't just paperwork. This is a systemic failure. No, systemic and intentional failure of the Biden administration. It's children's lives put at risk. Now, it's all ORR, hands on deck. We're combing through every report, every detail, because protecting children isn't optional. I mean, Jesus said that it would be better that a millstone be hung around your neck and you be cast into the sea before you harm a child.
I just want to make sure that I'm getting this right, because the numbers are, you said something about 7,000, but didn't she just say 65,000 reports?
Yeah, so the total number of reports of ignored or dismissed that the Biden administration actually ignored was 65,000 different reports. 7,300 of those were human trafficking.
Okay.
So you've got 65,000 reports of migrant children for various reasons, but 7,300 of those were human trafficking. That is abuse of children, like credible reports. And just another thing too. A long time ago, I did an episode about human trafficking in Wyoming, and I took a lot of heat from conservatives because I interviewed a gal here in Sheridan who is not on our side. I mean, she is definitely on the left side of things. But in that episode, she explains how human trafficking happens in every community. It might just be prostitution. It might be something as horrible as child sexual abuse or child pornography, but it does happen in every community.
It's actually really rampant in Wyoming.
Yeah.
In that we have two long, lonely interstates.
Wide open spaces.
Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on. So it's a serious issue everywhere. And Wyoming is by no means immune.
No. Our friend Mark Jennings, former Representative Mark Jennings, he has a story when he was at a conference in Cheyenne, and it was being put on by the Department of Criminal Investigation. And, they asked the question, how many of you think that there's trafficking problems here in Wyoming? And Mark said hardly anybody raised their hand. And the DCI said, well, we've set up a little experiment for you. We've got this ad we're going to post on social media or on all these sites. And they had dressed up one of their agents to look like she was a lot younger. And Mark said within minutes of them posting that ad, they had to shut down the interstate around the truck stop where this child was supposedly going to be at. And that's just in Cheyenne. And he said it happened in minutes, no more than 15 minutes, and the place was clogged. So don't think that this doesn't happen in your own community. And, like I said, it's better that millstone be hung around your neck and you cast into this sea before you harm a child. And this is, again, I can't tell you how disgusted I am from the actions of the Biden administration. There's a lot of bad things that they did, but this is by far the worst.
These are the people that defend to the nth degree the right of a woman to kill her baby for the sake of convenience and to improve her future. I saw a meme, which I thought was really pretty well done and poignant, and it shows one person back several hundred years ago or 1,000 years ago, standing there with her baby, wanting to sacrifice it on the altar so that they would have a good harvest that year. And we all look at that and say, that is abhorrent. We wouldn't accept that. And then the next one was a woman considering an abortion. Obviously, she's very large, and saying, this is not the right time for me.
It's not convenient.
This is inconvenient for me. I want my future to be better. They're saying the same thing. Yeah. I want my future to be better, and so you're going to be sacrificed.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrible. You know what you should do is write to your congresswoman. Now, Harriet Hageman, I know for a fact, is absolutely on all over this. You would get no argument from her, but you need to write to our congresspeople. Call them, write to them, and make sure that they know that this is something that we absolutely have to take care of. There's no question about this. This is absolutely abhorrent. All right, let's move on to something a little bit more lighthearted. That was kind of a downer of a segment. So maybe over the weekend you heard the audio of Tim Walz saying that Democrats need to bully the S out of Trump. And it was all over TV. And, Tim Walz, he is the man's man. He can fix a truck. He can replace the air filter on his Scout, but he's definitely very manly. And Democrats, there's been this effort for them to regain the trust of, masculine men. And they choose Tim Walz to do it. That was the reason given, for choosing him to be Kamala Harris's vice president. I think the truth is if you're running for president, you have to have a vice president who's dumber than you are. If you're a liberal, if you're a conservative, you want a vice president who's pretty smart, which is why we have J.D. Vance. But liberals, you have to be a moron to be vice president, and that's why they picked Tim Walz. But their stated reason is that, he's a football coach. Not really. He's a man's man. Not really. He can fix a car. Not really. But he's more masculine, and that's going to get men to vote for us. So in the soundbite, Tim Walz says, quote, maybe it's time for us to be a little meaner, a little bit more force. Quote, the thing that bothers a teacher more than anything is to watch a bully, the governor continued. And when it's a child, you talk to them and you tell them why bullying is wrong. But when it's an adult like Donald Trump, you bully the S out of them back. You see, the Democrats have completely missed why it is that conservatives and a lot of liberals, for that matter, are no longer going along with the charade that is the Democrat Party. Because the Democrat Party doesn't stand for anything except for Marxism. That's it. There's no other rabbit they have in their hat. It is entirely Marxism, which is why you get all these ridiculous things like DEI and all this transgenderism. And they think that that's going to play well with voters because, of course, that is the essence of freedom. You being able to do anything that you want. No. That's not freedom. It's not liberty. That's moral bankrupt anarchy is what that is. And, but the Democrats, they think that swearing is going to attract more masculine people to them. Now, one of the sound bites you probably didn't hear is Tim Walz appearing on the Gavin Newsom podcast. I don't know, Ken, have you watched the Gavin Newsom podcast? You should. It's fascinating. He did have Charlie Kirk on there, which was an interesting conversation. No, you shouldn't, and there's no reason for you to watch it. But it is people like Gavin Newsom and Tim Walz that the Democrats have tapped to be the masculine figures. And, I thought about playing the video of this because in the video, and I don't even want to imitate what Gavin Newsom was doing, but he had his hands together and he was kind of dancing for the camera. And Gavin Newsom and Tim Walz are discussing this problem here. So let's hear it. It is cut number 6. Go ahead and play that.
Yeah, Bill Clinton said it better than anyone years and years ago after slacking. Given the choice, I'm paraphrasing, the American people always support strong and wrong versus weak and right.
Because I saw it for me, and not that I spend much time thinking about this, and it just baffled me how much time they spent trying to attack me that I wasn't like masculine enough in their vision. Like I would have never believed this. I saw Fox News did like a couple days because I used a straw. And I'm like, hell, man, what am I?
Okay, hold on there.
What did he use the straw for?
Exactly right. He is a Democrat. Maybe he's friends with Hunter Biden. Well, the truth is that whole straw thing never happened. You see, the Democrats really don't pay attention to anything that conservatives actually say. There's more assumptions than anything, which is why you end up getting people like Amy Edmonds throwing around a bunch of ridiculous assertions. People like Tim Walz saying, oh, they attacked me because I used a straw. That's not masculine enough for them. The Democrats really don't pay any attention to facts. For them, making assertions that have no basis in reality or fact has always been their go-to model. Let's listen to a little bit more of this.
else do you drink a milkshake type of thing? But they focused on it obsessively, which I think, again, is their obsession, their weirdness. We buy their frame on these issues of sexuality, but their whole thing is that they spent all their time, these guys, on Fox News, that Walz is gay, he's not masculine, he doesn't coach football the way he should, or doesn't. What do you think about this? I mean,
it's
this misogyny in here that's happening.
Yeah, well, but this notion of masculinity is deeply part of it. That's one of the. I mean, I think it goes. And you can look at the reasons why we've had this sort of dialectic over the Me Too movement. We've had this dialectic even prior to the Me Too movement. This
How
notion
do you fight it?
This notion
I think
of
I could kick most of their ass. I do think that if they wanted to.
Okay, there we go. So hold on right there.
But I don't know.
So there it is. Right there. I think that I could kick their ass. Okay, so that is the Democrats' vision of what conservatives want to see in a candidate. The tough, masculine guy that can whoop anybody. Well, the truth is, conservatives don't agree with that at all. By our very nature, we're the people that want to persuade people. And, for conservatives, it's a question of what is right and what is wrong. We want to win the argument. We want to persuade people to our side. We look at the Democrats and we say that they're fundamentally misguided on any number of issues. And so we embark on a quest, and I do this all the time. I'm just as guilty as everybody else. But we embark on this quest to persuade people to win the argument, because in our minds we don't look at things in terms of dragging somebody behind the school and beating the hell out of them, like Biden would say, or in the soundbite that I played for you. We don't look at the world in that way. In our vision of the world, it's a question of right and wrong. And I'm paraphrasing Rush Limbaugh here, but for the Democrats, it's a question of good versus evil. Now, how many times have you heard Democrats say, well, if the Republicans win, they're not going to feed children. Yep, children are not going to be able to eat. They're going to poison the water. Well, only evil people poison the water. Oh, only evil people starve children. How many times have you heard, well, old people are going to die because they're going to cut off Social Security? Well, only evil people would let old people die. And because it's the conservatives, they're advocating for policies that we say are going to harm children or old people or push grandma off of a cliff. Well, then conservatives are evil. Now, the reason I bring this up is those two ideas, a question of right versus wrong, that is persuading people to come to our side with logic and reason and facts, is incongruous to the Democrat vision of conservatives being evil. That it's a question of good versus evil for them. And that's also why when you're in a battle against evil, man, anything you do that can beat evil, well, that's acceptable, which allows Democrats to lie. Now, conservatives all the time, we look at a lot of people in the Democrat Party and we say, how is it possible that they can lie so much? How can they possibly sleep with themselves after lying so much? Well, when you believe that the ends justify the means, that it is a battle of good versus evil, then anything you do is acceptable to achieve that end goal. For conservatives, we would never say that the ends justify the means. I mean, for us, how we get to a goal is at least as important as the end goal itself. We would never want to win a game by cheating. I mean, there's no victory in that. Well, Democrats, man, if they can win an election by cheating, they'll do it. If they can win a game by cheating, they'll do it. If they can win a track race by letting a man compete against women, they'll do it. Because for them, it is winning the battle of what they view as good versus evil. Go ahead and play some more. Are we at the end of the Tim Walz thing? All right, play some more.
We're going to fall into that place where we want to. Okay, we challenge you to a WWE fight here, type of thing.
No, but it's a natural reaction. I think it's one of the reasons we're losing so many men. And again, it's multi-ethnic. It's not just white men. We're losing them. We're losing them to these guys online. We're losing them to people that I'm bringing on this podcast as well. That's why I brought.
These are bad guys, though. These are bad guys.
But they exist, and we could deny they exist. They exist. Not only they exist, they persist, and they're actually influencing young kids every single day.
How do we push some of those guys back under a rock?
I think we have to first understand what their motivations are. I think we have to understand
how do we push these
what
guys,
they're actually doing.
All right, that's enough. How do we push these guys back under a rock? You heard Tim Walz say it. Now, he also said, these are bad guys. Now, who are the people that he's talking about? Well, he's referring to Charlie Kirk. and a couple of other peoples that were on Gavin Newsom's podcast. That's who they're talking about. Now, I've listened to Charlie Kirk a lot. I would never say that he's a bad guy, that he's fundamentally evil or anything like that, or that we should push him under a rock. But that is the worldview of people like Tim Walz and Gavin Newsom. That it's not, they don't just believe that conservatives are wrong, they believe that they're bad people, that we're bad people, which is why we see them do a lot of the things that they do. When I come back from the break, I'm going to bring you a Wyoming example specifically of what they're talking about. That the folks on the other side that we disagree with, they're bad people. They're mean. They're evil. They do things to other folks to try to push them under a rock to make them go away. If you thought that all of these things that I talked about on Cowboy State Politics are national issues, you're wrong. They happen right here in Wyoming. And I'm going to bring you a stupid op-ed by a guy who doesn't even, well, I'd love to have him on the program. It would be a fascinating interview. But I'll bring it to you. It's spring-ish in Wyoming. Well, what that means for the uninitiated is that it's going to be 70 degrees one day and then snow 1.5 feet the next. And really, if you don't like those two options, just wait a little bit. The weather will change. I know, it sounds a little stressful, but really you should put your mind at ease and buy a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They'll keep you warm and dry even on the nastiest, coldest spring-ish day, and they'll keep you cool and dry even when it's 75 and sunny. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you're not going to be disappointed. Are you one of those people that said something like this before Trump became president?
I have a house in Spain that is going to be ready right after the election. Siberia.
Nova Scotia.
I'm definitely moving to Canada.
Straight to hell.
Iceland. France.
Asia's pretty cool.
And has the past 5 weeks just been more than you could bear? If that's the case, you have come to the right place. All you need to do is call my friend Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. Last year, she sold around $30 million worth of property. Everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So if you've got to get the heck out of Dodge, if you've got to be Gone Johnson because you can't stand that Trump is the president, call Rebecca Bextel. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Let me say that one more time for you in case you missed it. 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Number 35 on the list of the 100 podcasts you need to listen to in 2025. This program is only going to continue to expand. You can watch the live show on YouTube, Facebook, X, and on Rumble. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcast. And as it relates to the podcast, you might want to listen to the one I released yesterday. It was yet another in my series of exposing what's actually happening in the Wyoming Senate. And it gives you clear evidence that there's a pattern of unethical behavior that's been happening in the Wyoming Senate. And I just give you one more example of it. And believe it or not, I've got more in my bags of tricks. So if you're one of those new redcoats, which let me give you a definition of what that is. If you're a Republican and you don't act like a Republican, you're no different than the folks that ran around during the American Revolution that pretended to be patriots but really weren't. You're operating under a brand that you're no longer representing. You're voting with the Democrats around 50% of the time, and I'm talking about the leadership, some of the leadership in the Wyoming Senate. The majority floor leader votes with the Democrats about 80% of the time. I'm referring to the other two jokers who, half the time they're not voting conservative and they're not voting in your best interests. And the reality is they're not really acting all that ethically. So go ahead and listen to the podcast. You can get it anywhere that you get your podcast: Podbean, iHeartRadio, iTunes, really anywhere.
Hello again, and welcome to American Top 40. I'm Casey Kasem, and I want to thank Dave debuting this week at number 36.
Exactly, and there's a reason why this program is at number 35. Went up one place is that I am showing you the truth, what's happening in Wyoming politics. So let me give you an example of this whole not understanding the conservative argument and believing that conservatives are evil. There's an op-ed in the Cowboy, and the rightful place for it, by the way, in the Cowboy, but it's by Representative Rob Geringer. Now, Rob Geringer ran around the Wyoming legislature in the past session claiming to be a conservative, tried to convince people that he was, and then his voting record came out. And it turns out that he's not exactly as conservative as he leads on, but his op-ed is entitled Factional Politics in Wyoming. And here's the opening, and then we're going to skip a couple paragraphs. Quote, "Whether raised in Wyoming or moving here later in life, many of us live here because we value freedom, independence, and common sense. But lately, it feels like something's off in our politics. More shouting, less listening, more finger pointing, less problem solving. It's frustrating. It's disappointing." Now you skip a couple paragraphs, and he says, and I'm fully expecting Agent 29's head to explode here in just a second. I didn't go grab the duct tape, though. I think I should probably, maybe I need to take a break and, go grab a roll or two because it's going to happen. Here's what Rob Geringer says. "Here in Wyoming, we've seen it up close. Some have a tendency to immediately revile an individual who has a different view based on their experience, faith, or principles. Rather than listen and understand the basis from which the individual has developed that view, they snap to the conclusion that by having a different view, the individual is an enemy. And it doesn't stop there. Whether based on an unyielding position within a faction or in pursuit of their own personal political ambitions, some go further. They try to destroy the credibility of those who disagree by slapping on a toxic label and twisting their words into something it was never intended. This kind of behavior isn't leadership. It's factional warfare."
That's projection if I ever saw it.
Exactly.
You're looking into a mirror. Yeah.
Well, and here's the thing. Like, just listen to the first part. A tendency to immediately revile an individual who has a different view based on their experience, faith, or principles. I ask you, Representative Geringer, and before I get into this, I just want to say that there is an open invitation for you to come on Cowboy State Politics and defend this piece of drivel. Absolutely. And by the way, if you think that just because I have a different view of the world, and let's be honest, I'm right 99% of the time. I mean, it's documented. There's no way of getting around it. That I revile you? No, I just think you're wrong. And I think that your behavior needs to be called out. And I think your voting record needs to be called out because, quite frankly, you're not a conservative. And we can define what conservative means, but I think if you listen to Cowboy State Politics, you already know free markets, liberty, respect for the family values, a respect for life from conception to natural death. All of the things that the Republican Party is supposed to stand for, those 23 planks in the Republican platform, that is what a conservative is. What a conservative is not is what you portray, and it's reflected in your voting record. Now, I ask you, Representative Geringer, and again, I'll repeat myself one more time. You are welcome on Cowboy State Politics anytime you like. I'll give you an hour. I'll give you 2 hours. It's my show. We'll go 3 hours if you want, though I don't know, if you'll enjoy it or not. But you really do need to stand up and defend this bullcrap that you published in a liberal-leaning outlet, the Cowpie, and you just make broad claims without backing any of them up. In this piece, there is not one single example, not one, to back up any of the claims that he makes. And my favorite one is some have a tendency to immediately revile an individual who has a different view. No, you're just wrong. And there's a difference between me pointing out that you are fundamentally mistaken in your worldview, in your view of politics, in your view of how free market economics actually work, of how we ought to have low taxation, how we ought to have the least amount of government involvement in your personal life as humanly possible. You are fundamentally wrong about your role in the Wyoming legislature. Your role is to administer the state, to make laws, to solve problems that exist in the state. And your role, by the way, is also to handle those problems that counties and other municipalities are either unwilling or unable to solve. Hence, the What is a Woman Act. Now, Rob Geringer, if I'm correct, argued against that, though he voted for it in the end. But why do we have to have those laws? Well, it's because there are a number of people in this state who discriminate against others based on sex, and there's only two sexes and two genders. My point here is that even though we disagree, and I fundamentally disagree with you, Representative Geringer, I don't revile you, and I would challenge you to give me one example, just one, of anybody who has reviled you.
I'm thinking about the things that you were just saying, and I'm thinking about the interaction that I have. Rob and I have spoken together many
I
times.
think you guys have worked together, right?
Yeah, introduced me to his dad, and that was interesting. The problem is that a lot of these people don't understand, the Lloyd Larsons, the rest of them. They don't understand that from where we sit, they're the problem. We came to Cheyenne to represent the people who elected us against what they have been doing for years. We are there because they are the problem. And they consistently say, well, you need to work with us. We need to reach across the aisle. No, we're done with you. I think it was Rush that said the only thing we need to do is go there and whip the pants off of them. We need to beat them. That doesn't mean I revile them. But it means I don't think they should be in government, and they should not be in charge.
Absolutely. It is a question of right versus wrong. That's just what I was getting to in the beginning of the program. That for conservatives, it is a question of right versus wrong. And sometimes good versus evil. But for the liberal contingent, they view conservatives as evil. That's why he uses words like revile and the enemy. The individual is an enemy, and it doesn't stop there.
There's a Christian expression that says you hate the sin and not the sinner. And I don't think they've ever been able to separate those in their mind. If I despise the things that you are doing because I see the danger and the harm that comes of that, abortion's a classic example, doesn't mean that I hate you. And very, very difficult for them to understand that actually trying to right those wrongs is a form of love. That's doing justice.
Yes, absolutely. And, it's not that conservatives hate liberals. I hate the ideology. I hate the logical conclusions of some of their actions. I hate how sometimes liberals hurt people intelligently. I hate how, sometimes where liberals steal money that they don't need, and frankly, they're not entitled to, from people who work hard to provide for their families. I hate the results of your actions, but I don't hate you as a person. I think that you're profoundly misguided. I think that in many cases you're lying to your constituents, and I don't really particularly like that character trait. When you show up and you say, well, things like I'm a conservative, taxes are too high, I love my guns, we shouldn't kill little babies, and then you vote for things that are a direct opposite of that. Yeah, I don't like that at all. But the question of whether or not you're reviled, that doesn't even come into it. Now, we can have a contentious argument. We can debate the merits of your flawed positions, but it doesn't mean that I despise you as a person. Now, listen to this, quote, In recent years, and I think that he's probably referring to yours truly here, in recent years, we've seen an increase in political behavior that prioritizes loyalty over thoughtfulness. Dissent is treated as betrayal. Policy decisions are judged not on merit, but on whether or not they come from the correct faction. Let's see here. There is, and you skip.
Hang on just a second. A great example of that being projection is when we stopped committee bills.
Great example.
I think that reflects exactly what he's talking about, but the other way around.
Yeah. Now, here's one. Let's see here. Left or right, dominating the process and silencing dissent. That's what he's referring to there, when their bills are killed on the floor. Well, this is the system that we have. For over 50 years, liberals have been in control of the Wyoming legislature. And if you were a conservative, your bill probably is not going to make it through committee, and it's certainly not going to make it through the floor. Unless, of course, you have negotiated with the liberals and your conservative bill is no longer conservative, or if it doesn't have an enforcement mechanism onto it and it's just a feel-good measure. The liberals were notorious for that. But what he's referring to here is committee bills, like Agent 29 said, getting killed on the floor, because just because they go through a committee doesn't make them a good piece of legislation. And the way our system works is when you are in the minority, you kind of have to work with the majority. That's how our system is set up. It's not silencing dissent. Trust me, I sat there and listened to Rob Geringer give campaign speech after campaign speech on the floor. Nobody silenced him. Nobody told him to sit down. Nobody told him that he couldn't talk. Nobody called him a bad person, though I probably did refer to him as a bad conservative. That's a different thing, though. What I'm saying is your ideas are wrong. I'm not saying you're a terrible person. Frankly, I've never even met him. But from all accounts, that he's actually a pretty nice guy. That doesn't mean that his ideas are correct. See, as conservatives, we know that our ideas work, that our ideas are in line with the Constitution. I'm not saying we don't make a mistake every now and again. I can give you a perfect example of one that I talked about on the podcast, this whole government training thing, that if you're in public office, you have to have training. Well, that was perverted into 8 hours of indoctrination. Okay, I was a little irritated at the sponsor of that bill, but, they went in and fixed it. So dissent is not any sort of, negative emotion. It doesn't mean that you're reviled. It doesn't mean that you're evil, and it doesn't mean that you're the enemy. Now, if you want to take a loose definition of what the word enemy means, we could say that, are you my political enemy? Do we have a difference of opinion? Do you look at the world in a fundamentally different way than I do? Are your ideas, at least in my opinion, diametrically opposed from the way that I believe? Yes. In the battlefield of ideas, I despise your arguments, but I don't despise you as a person. Let's have the debate, Rob. Come on this program and let's do it.
I think a lot of the issue for me is the genuineness or the sincerity or the honesty and integrity of the individual involved. I look at somebody like Bob Nicholas, calls himself a Republican, runs as a Republican.
And is the most liberal representative
not
in
even
the
close
House.
to that. On the other hand, we're going to have on here in the next week or two Representative Trey Sherwood.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I am too. She is a delight to be around. She's a lot of fun. She is completely upside down in her worldview, which makes her votes wrong. But she's not a horrible person. We get along pretty well. She brought me a birthday cake. But
did it burn down the house with all the candles?
No. That's another topic. The sprinklers didn't even go off. So, but the point being, we can have good discussions because we're honest from the beginning about we come from other sides. If you're running around like my predecessor did, and trying to tell people of Sheridan how conservative he is and how gung ho he was to do all of these good Republican things, and then you go down there and you vote with the Democrats 85% of the time. Now I have a problem.
Well, yeah, because you've lied to your constituents. Now, that's the behavior that I really can't stand. Now, listen to the last part, how he concludes this piece. We can be principled without being hostile. We can stand firm without tearing others down. And we can remember that disagreement doesn't make someone the enemy. Sometimes it just means they're part of the republic, a republic designed to withstand exactly this kind of pressure. As Paul Harvey would say, page 3. Madison didn't expect us to all agree. He expected us to listen, deliberate, and respect the institutions that keep power in check. That's not weakness, it's wisdom. Let's not burn down the house just because we don't like who's sitting on the other side of the table. Again, it is not that someone is viewed as an enemy. On the battlefield of ideas, there is a big difference between having a vigorous argument and defending your position to its logical conclusion. There's a difference between that and being hostile. Just because you find the force of my argument to be overpowering in some cases does not mean that I'm being hostile to you. It means that I fundamentally believe in my position and I'm going to defend it. What liberals have a problem with is when they're confronted with logic and reason and facts. Because the facts they can't argue with, and fundamentally their ideas don't work. They've been proven not to work. They drive up deficits. They steal money from people that worked hard for it, and you expand government to a point that it controls all of our lives. And if, Rob Geringer, you believe in liberty and you believe in the republic and you believe that we ought to have an expansive view of liberty instead of an expansive view of government, then you would come over to our side. But the problem is, you don't believe those things. And it's clear through your op-ed that when your beliefs are challenged, you view it as me hating you. No. I just disagree with you. You're wrong. I'm right. And that's the end of the story. And I'll prove that I'm right about 27 different ways if you have the courage to come on the program. Now, let me ask you, Agent 29, how many people have I interviewed?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
Hundreds.
8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This will take a while.
Yeah, it's a lot. And has there ever been a single one of those interviews where I've been disrespectful? No, not one of them. Now, have there been some interviews that were not exactly comfortable? Yeah, absolutely. Because I was talking to people that have a loose relationship with the truth. But that doesn't mean that they were disrespectful. I forced you to defend your position.
I spent 30-some years of my life working in other people's homes.
Yeah.
And a lot of them did not have the same political views that I have. But I'm a political animal, and invariably after you've been in somebody's home for a while, some of those things come up. I have had some truly fantastic discussions with people with a totally different worldview than I. And I appreciate that. Frankly, I would rather have that discussion than with somebody who just wants to be like an echo chamber. Oh, yeah, of course. That gets kind of boring. One of the things that I appreciate about you, David, is that you and I don't agree on everything.
No.
And yet, every once in a while, I get a win.
Yeah, every once in a while. Not very often, though. I mean, sometimes Agent 29 falls into that 1 percentile category, but that's okay. Sometimes 1% is good enough. And only 3% of the population participated in the Revolutionary War, and we were able to whip the pants off of Britain. So, I mean, there's some hope for you, Agent 29. The point here in this whole piece is that just because I disagree with you does not mean that I hate you. It doesn't mean that I think you're a terrible person. It does mean, however, that I think that sometimes your ideas are fundamentally misguided and in some cases monumentally dangerous, that the results of them are. But let's have that discussion. Instead of publishing a one-sided piece with not a single example, with not a single proof of anything that you're saying, with not one single personal example of anybody reviling you, why don't you come on the program and let's meet on the battlefield of ideas? Let's see if your ideas withstand scrutiny instead of just publishing a one-sided piece in an echo chamber that already agrees with you. Come on the program, Rob. Even though my argument and my reaction to your piece was a little bit forceful, that doesn't mean that I disagree with. That doesn't mean that I think that you're a bad person. What it means is your ideas are fundamentally wrong, and I've watched a lot of your votes that, frankly, I'm surprised that you actually got up on the floor and argued for them. But come on the program and let's have a debate. Let's talk about it. You can have as much time as you want. Well, we've almost burned through a busy broadcast, 2 hours on Cowboy state politics. And I want to end with a piece that I think will make my producer, Agent 29, laugh. Or it should. It should make everybody laugh, really. But there's some people at the University of Wyoming that they believe that cowboy ethics aren't really what they once were in Wyoming. In fact, they're convinced of it. You see that we've moved a heck of a long way past what it means to be a cowboy, and it's apropos that Agent 29 is actually wearing a John Wayne shirt.
I keep hearing the Brokeback Mountain theme in the background.
Well, you may with this article from Wildpile, and I quote, "The University of Wyoming launched its The World Needs More Cowboys campaign in 2018." And this comes from the Associated Masters Social Work students at the University of Wyoming. But they launched The World Needs More Cowboys campaign in 2018 with a video celebrating the diversity of students who embody the cowboy legacy. Tenacious individuals who courageously pursue adventure and freedom through fearless independence in the American West. As students, UW asks us to embody cowboy ethics, but our institution isn't cowboy anymore. What a sad state of affairs that the university whose mascot is the Cowboys no longer represents cowboys. If UW applauds cowboys for their unyielding courage and relentless curiosity, as banners adorning the campus lampposts suggest, then the administration should be standing up up to the fear and narrow-mindedness exemplified by the Wyoming Freedom Caucus's attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion. How dare you, Agent 29? After hours of testimony over the last year from professors, students, and staff who spoke out against your outrageous push to defund DEI programs, the UW administration demonstrated that they were more willing to over-comply than over-censor essential university offices out of fear of legislative reprimand. This is not cowboy, unwavering integrity. It's bowing down to authority at the first point of resistance. And the best part of all of this piece is that to be a cowboy, are you ready for this? Do you have a drum roll? You don't have a drum roll. But to be a cowboy is to embrace DEI. Did you know that, Ken?
I would like to see the look on my granddad's face. I'll just leave it at that.
Absolutely incredible. When did relentless curiosity mean allowing fear to dissuade us from inviting hard work? Creative thinkers and adventurers. Okay, blah, 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 blah. What this is trying to do is to mainstream DEI into the culture of Wyoming. And it's interesting that some students at the University of Wyoming, master's students even, are even making the argument that diversity, equity, and inclusion is what being a cowboy is all about. So let me tell you what is at the base of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is, again, what I opened the program with, reducing things to their lowest term. Essentially, DEI focuses on the immutable characteristics that you don't have any possibility of ever changing. Whether you're a man or a woman, or you're old, or you're young, or you're white, or you're black, or you're, whatever color you want. Those things you don't have any control over. And that is what DEI focuses on. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Agent 29, that maybe there might be some cowboys, actual cowboys, that, really do deserve to wear a hat, unlike me. No, I have a great cowboy hat, that believe that it is the measure of a man, not things that he are outside of his control.
I think one of the best films that shows the measure of a man does feature John Wayne.
Yeah, well, of course it does. He's a man's man, right?
It also features Bruce Dern, who did a typical liberal thing and shot him in the back.
The shootist.
That's the Cowboys.
Yeah.
The Cowboys. When John Wayne, is out there with all those kids, you begin to understand what manhood is. And I respect him for doing that. There's one particular scene where the kid is having a stuttering problem and he gets him really mad, so he comes back and swears at him. And when he gets mad and starts swearing, he quits stuttering. He just did him a little bit of a favor, and then he looks at the boy and says, I wouldn't make a habit out of saying that. but yeah, that film, I think, exemplifies a lot of what John Wayne toxic masculinity really is, not this new counterfeit that's out there.
Now, one of the people that reposted Geringer's piece that we just talked about was Gail Simmons. Right now, Gail Simmons, as much as I dislike talking to her, I mean, she is interesting for an interview. She's constantly going on and on about the Code of the West, and maybe we should have Gail on to talk about this piece from UW. But last I heard that in the old Code of the West, the cowboy ethic, you should draw a line in the sand. You should stand up for what's right. Stand up for those things that you believe in, those things that are true, not DEI.
Perhaps we should close with the Code of the West.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
It's in here. It's the state code. The Code of the West is derived from the book Cowboy Ethics by James P. Owen, summarized as follows, was adopted as the official state code in 2010. Live each day with courage. Take pride in your work. Always finish what you start. Do what has to be done. Be tough but fair. When you make a promise, keep it. Ride for the brand. Talk less. Say more. I'm looking at you.
This is what I do for a living.
Remember that some things are not for sale and know where to draw the line.
Ah, yes. That seems to be, Ken, when you read that, that just screams DEI at me. I mean, we are dealing with a group of people that are endeavoring at their, to do whatever they can to distort. No, not that yet. I haven't even, no. See, maybe we'll go 3 hours.
No, I just read to you, talk less, say more.
No, that's not it. This is my program. Anyway, we burned through another busy broadcast, 2 hours on the program. Make sure you don't miss the podcast, which you can get anywhere podcasts are available. Don't miss yesterday's installment, man. It was a doozy. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns, I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics. We'll see you tomorrow with another 2 hours.